learners, welcome to our session today. I am your instructor, CPA Ringo Frederick. Today's session is a continuation of what you are doing. We are looking at the concepts of learning curve. And on learning curve concepts, remember in our last class, we had looked at various key concepts that you must always tend to understand anytime you're handling the learning curve concept. So today's class is just a continuation of what you are doing. And we are talking of learning curve. Learning curve. One thing that you must understand on learning curve, my good students, is that basically is a concept that will try to assist us to estimate the cost that we can incur, but in this case it has been confined on aspect of the labor cost. So the whole concept of learning curve, it will evolve around the labor cost, of which that is what we learned in our previous class. So today's class, I want us to look at what event in a practical world are we going to use the learning curve to estimate the cost that we might incur. And mentioning that, you must always recall these concepts that anytime you're talking of learning curve, at this point we'll always be talking of the concept of average time, and talk about the aspect of the total time. So these are the most critical concepts that you must always be having at the back of your mind. So for average time, in this case, we're having y bar, which in that case we'll be talking of a x raised to power b, where a, remember we mentioned that this is a time or a cost that we are using or spending to produce the first batch, first unit. X, basically these are the cumulative production that you are having, or rather the cumulative units that we do have. Whereas B is our learning index. B is the learning index, where B, recall, we say that our learning index, for you to determine your learning index, basically we will be talking of log R, that is log the learning rate, we divide by log 2, which is very critical. Total time. To determine our y, which is our total time, we'll be talking of a x raised to power 1 plus b. That should give us our total time. That should give us our total time. Understanding that is very critical, because the moment we do have our time, because we say that our main concern of us studying learning curve is to enable us to estimate our cost, and specifically the labor cost. Because as at the end of the day, you realize that for us to determine our labor cost, I will be having the aspect of the total labor hours times the labor rate per hour. This is what will give us our total labor cost. So learning curve will come in to enable us to determine the aspect of the total labor hours as it is, or in general, if I'm given the aspect of cost, it will enable us to determine the whole total labor cost. And that is a key concept that we studied in our last class, and what you need to understand anytime you're talking of learning curve. So in our session, my good students, in our class today, I want us to handle a specific question which will give us a wider understanding when it comes to the whole concept of learning curve. So the concept here, Mwalimu is going to share it on our screen. And of course, if you are on our app, still you can download this question. It is just the PDF above this video. We do have the PDF for those who are using phone. For those who are using web application, is a PDF just below this video. So this is our question. Alternatively, you can take an advantage and screenshot it here so that it will be easy for you to follow it as well. So here is our question, my good students. Here is our question. Here is our question. Here is our question. Believing that is very visible to all of us, we go through it together. And these are what you are told. That Shahada Limited produces and sells product X. The product requires skilled labor and entails a learning effect in its production. An extract of the production hours for the product is provided below. So an extract of the production hours of the product is provided below, where in this case I'm given the cumulative production in units as well as the cumulative time in hours. Additional information, we are told that the following information relates to the previous production period, where we do have cumulative production at start of the period, which is 528 units. We do have production during the period, which is 86 units. So I'm given cumulative production at start and production during that period. Note 2, we are told that the standard and budgeted data for the product were as follows. Budgeted production, I'm given 86 units. Budgeted overheads, I'm given on 5903. Standard labor cost, I'm given 10 shillings per hour. I'm given 10 shillings per hour. Then in addition to that, this is what you're told, that the standard material cost is 250 shillings per unit. Standard material cost is 250 shillings per unit. Required, the examiner here wants us to determine our learning curve rate. That was very good. The examiner here wants us to determine our learning curve rate. And note 2, we are required to unit production cost of product X during the previous production period. So this is what I'm required by our examiner to work it out. So that is our question. Kindly you can take a screenshot of it. Still, Mwalimu is going to have it just on the corner here so that you can work it out as you're viewing the question. I believe that it will be visible to all of us. So that is a question, my good student, that I'm given. And clearly here you can see that the examiner wants us to determine our learning curve, which in this case, the good thing is that in this case, on this question, the examiner did not give us what? Our learning rate. So I am required to determine our learning rate. So in scenarios where you are not given your learning rate, how will you go about it? At this point, it's very vital for us to recall what we studied in our last class, where in the event that you're not given your learning rate, how will you determine your learning rate? So learning rate, if not given, it is very easy for us to determine our learning rate if not given. And how will you determine that case? How will you determine the learning rate, my good students? Learning rate, you just take your average time of producing, say like the second batch. You divide by your average time of producing your first batch. So you must be having the concept of what? The average time. So like if you're not given the learning rate and you're supposed to determine your learning rate, just know that you're supposed to take your average time of producing, say like the second batch or the second units, whatever that will be given, right? You divide by your average time of producing the first unit. That's the best way and easiest way that you can determine your learning rate if not given. Like in our question here, we can clearly see I was told that I was given the aspect of our cumulative production and our cumulative time. The question is, I am asked to determine our learning rate, but do we have the aspect of what? Do we have the aspect of average time? We don't have an average time. Now, if you're not given your average time, will you not proceed because you're not given an average time? No. Recall that for you to determine your average time, my good students, for you to determine your average time, if not given a learning curve, that will be easy because you'll be taking your cumulative, which is the same as your total time. You are going to divide by the number of units on the number of units, of course, which is in line with the total time that you are given. To understand the concept clearly, this is what Mwalimu is saying. Like in our case here, we were told that we had our total, we had a cumulative production. In our question here, we had cumulative production, right? We had cumulative production. And in this case, you're also given what? The aspect of cumulative time. You are given our cumulative time. We are given our cumulative time. We are given our cumulative time. So cumulative production, cumulative time, remember we said that is the same as what? As a total time, right? So cumulative production, I was given in units, of course. This is in units. This is, of course, in units, where I was told that we had what? We had 1, 2 aspect of 4, 8, and 10. And here, I can clearly see that I'm having what? The doubling effect. We're having the doubling effect. We're having the doubling effect in our production. And whenever we're having the doubling effect in our production, recall what Mwalimu mentioned, that we will be having, the rate will be constant all through. The rate will be constant all through. What about cumulative time? For cumulative time, these are what I'm given. I'm given 200. We have 360. We have 648. In this case, I'm given 200. That is, this wasn't 10. I'm given up to 8, right? Where I'm having 360, 648, and we do have what? 1166. That is our cumulative time. So Mwalimu will ask, with the concept that you just studied today, are we able to determine our average time? Yes, it will be very easy for us now to determine our average time. Because my average time, therefore, my average time, my good students, of course, in hours, we should be having our cumulative time, total time we divide by the number of units. So in this case, I'll be having 200. I divide by 1, which should give me 200. And you realize that many a times, average time and total time of producing the first batch or unit, they will be the same. They will be the same. Proceed to the second one. 360, we divide by 2, that should give us 180. 648, we divide by 4, that should give us 162. I'm just dividing them, right? Then 1166, we divide by 8, that should give us 145.75. That is 1166, we divide by 8, that should give us what? 145.75. 145.75. So basically, that is what we do have. That is what you do have. Now, my good students, after we have determined that, the big question would be, can we now determine our learning rate? Because recall, Mwalimu has given us here a very clear procedure of how we can determine our learning rate. So therefore, to determine my learning rate here, which the examiner wanted us to determine, my learning rate therefore will be as simple as this. We are going to take, of course, my average time of producing the second batch, which is 180. I divide by average time of producing the first batch, which is 200. So therefore, that should give us a learning rate of what percentage, my good students? I should be talking of 180 divided by 200, which should give us 0.9. In that case, we can translate it to what? 90%. So confidently, we can agree and say that our learning rate is 90%. And that is what the examiner had asked us to do on the first scenario, for us to determine our learning rate. And that is how we are supposed to work out your learning rate. That is what I'm given. I believe that all of us have been able to understand the whole concept up to that point. That is Mwalimu's belief, that you are able to understand the concept up to that point. Determination of our learning rate. Determination of our learning rate. Determination of our learning rate. But the question did not end there. The moment I do have my learning rate, the big question is, my good students, can we now determine our learning index? Assuming you are not asked, but it will be very important. How will you determine your learning index? That is learning index, which in this case, we are talking of what? Learning index. We are looking at B. How will you determine B? Recall B, we say that we should be talking of what? Log R, we divide by log 2. And already we have determined our learning rate. So we are talking of log 0.9. we divide by log 2. That should give us how much, my good students? You're talking of log of course, 0.9, which is giving us that figure that I'm having. We divide by log 2 to give us a learning index of, so here we are talking of log 0.9, we divide by log 2. At this point, Mwalimu is getting my B, or rather learning index. I'm getting a figure of negative 0.152. And that's the figure that Mwalimu is getting as the learning rate, or rather learning index, as much as you aren't given, but it's very important for us to note that. So that is what Mwalimu is getting as our learning rate, or rather our learning index. Log R, we divide by log 2. So, given such a question, I believe that concept has synced in very clearly. We proceed to the second part. The second part of this question is what we requested to do. The second part of this question, my good student, this is what the examiner wanted us to do. The examiner here wanted us to prepare what? Unit production cost of product X during the previous production period. So unit production cost. Unit production cost is what the examiner wants us to prepare. And anytime you're talking of production cost, basically, what should click at the back of our mind? Allow me to remove the question a bit. So, anytime you're talking of production cost, my good students, this is what must always tend to click at the back of our mind. Production cost. These are, of course, costs that you normally incur in producing your product. And at this point, you should know that you normally tend to talk of how many products, or rather how many types of costs. 3 main. These will be direct material cost, talk about direct labor cost, as well as what? The aspect of variable OHDs, variable overheads. So this is what will give us what? Our production cost. And many times maybe you can talk of what? Fixed overheads. But relating to production, fixed production overheads. So that as at the end of the day, this is what you should be having as what? As a product cost. Because recall, when we started, we mentioned that learning curve, the whole idea of learning curve, we be using learning curve concept to kind of try to estimate our cost. That is what we mentioned. We'll be using the learning curve concept to kind of try to estimate our cost. And in estimating our cost, of course, these are some of the things that we'll be having. Like, I need to estimate my material cost. I need to estimate our labor cost. I need to estimate our overhead cost. That's the most important thing that should click at the back of our mind. So, come to our question. We need to estimate this cost. In our question, what were we given? What were we given for estimation? Because we realize that, yes, I'm dealing with learning curve concept, which will assist us, but the big question that I should ask myself is, in our case, what are we given as our costs? I'll try to squeeze it here, this question of ours. I really want us to work it out with a question in place. Let me have it at that point. So in this case, my good students, we want to determine our costs. So what were we given as our cost that we will be required to determine? We can clearly see that at that point, I was given, of course, my material cost. Look at that note. I was given material cost. That is note number 2. Budgeted production units is 86 units. Budgeted overheads is 150,903. Standard labor cost, I'm given 10 shillings per hour. Then below there, we are given aspect to do with the standard material cost. I'm given 250 shillings per unit. That is just below here. Yeah, you see? Standard material cost, I'm given 250 shillings per unit. That is what you do have, right? So, in this case, material cost, I'm having 250 per unit. Material cost here, we are having 250 per unit. So, allow me to take it there, 250 shillings per unit. What about direct labor cost? Direct labor cost we aren't given, but in this case you are told that we are given standard labor cost. What I was paying per hour, standard labor cost is 10 shillings per hour, 10 shillings per hour. So therefore, for me, I want to determine the cost I'm going to use to produce 1 unit. So therefore, we don't have what? We don't have the aspect of direct labor cost. What about variable overheads? So direct labor cost, in this case, I'm going to put question mark. I'm not given. We are supposed to determine that. Then talk about variable overheads. So you are told that budgeted overheads during the period, these are budgeted overheads, OHDs. I was given a figure of how much? 150,903. So budgeted OHDs, my good students, I'm given a figure of how much? I'm given a figure of course, 150,903. 150,903. And this budgeted overheads related to the production of how many units? Our production for the period, in this case, were 86 units. We had 86 units. So the big question that you're going to ask yourself is, can you determine your production overhead cost per unit, or rather our overheads per unit? So our overheads per unit, of course, are just be dividing that. Our overhead cost per unit, are just be dividing that, which should give us a figure of how much? 150,903. We divide by 86 units to give us, my good students, I'm having a figure of how much? 17. I'm having 1754. We do have, just a minute. We do have 1754.6. So allow me to take 1755. 1755 would be our budgeted overhead cost per unit. So I'm having 1755. So what don't we have? I don't have my direct labor cost per unit, because remember, production cost, basically this is based on per unit, right? This is a production cost per unit. This is a production cost per unit, and that is what the examiner wanted us to determine, right? So the only missing figure that I don't have here is our labor cost per unit. So the big question would be, how will you determine your labor cost per unit? To determine our labor cost per unit, recall, to determine our labor cost per unit, my good students, recall, we mentioned that we should be having this in mind. I should be talking of our total labor cost. Total labor cost, we divide by aspect of the number of units, total number of units produced. Where to determine again my total labor cost, to determine our total labor cost, recall, we should be talking of whatever that we mentioned and be having the aspect of the total labor hours, we multiply by labor cost per hour. So in our question, clearly you can see the examiner had given us what? Labor cost per hour. But we don't have the number of units, or rather the total labor hours. So this is where the learning curve concept will come in. This is where the learning curve concept will come in. So the learning curve concept, recall, for us to determine our total labor hours, which is y, we should always be talking of a x raised to power 1 plus b. Ax raised to power 1 plus b, that should give us what? Our total labor hours. Total labor hours. So this is what now I must apply for us to determine our total labor hours. Kindly make sure that that has ticked at the back of our mind. For us to determine our total labor hours, I should be talking of y, which is equal to ax plus b. The big question is, in our question, my good students, what was our b, what was our a, and what will be our x? So I'm looking at two scenarios. Remember, the concept is about cumulative production, where we mentioned that x stands for our cumulative production. X will stand for our cumulative production. X will stand for our cumulative production. So analyzing it, do we have our A? time or cost of producing the first unit or batch. Do we have that? Yes, we have determined that one here. We are told that cumulative production, so cumulative time of producing the first batch or unit, we had 200. So confidently, I can come and say my A is 200. Recall what we determined earlier on, right? Recall what we determined earlier on. B, my learning index. Already, we have determined our B, our learning index, which is the one that we had calculated. And I do believe that you still recall how we had computed that one, right? So I'm having negative 0.152. That is our learning index. My big question will be on our cumulative production, which is our X. My big question will be on our cumulative production, which is our X. So how will you determine your X, my good students? That is a big question that you're going to ask ourselves. How are we going to determine our X? To determine our X, remember we are looking at cumulative production. And in our question here, did you have this cumulative production? This is our question. We are talking of our cumulative production. Look at it clearly. If we can all go to note number 1 and 2, what were we told? Note 1 and 2, my good students, you can clearly see note 1 and 2. Kindly check note 1 and 2. Note 1, we are told that the following information relates to the previous production period, which in this case, cumulative production at start of the period, I had 528. So I'm having cumulative production at start of the period. So X, cumulative at start, I'm given how many units? 526, right? I'm given 528 units. I'm given 528 units. That is our cumulative production at start of the period. Remember our case here, we will be dealing with the aspect of cumulative production. So therefore, I'll also be required, because our case here is to determine the time that we took to produce how many units? The time that we took to produce 86 units. That is our goal. We want to determine, according to this question, we want to determine the time that we took to produce 86 units, because you can clearly see we are told that the production during the period is 86 units, which we are told in note 1. So therefore, I can't use 86 units directly. In our learning curve, I can't go to 86 units directly and determine the time that we took. I'll need to determine our cumulative production at end. Cumulative at end of the period will be how much? Cumulative at the end of the period, what you're going to do, my good students, that will be simple. I'm going to take cumulative at start of the period. We add cumulative during the period. Which cumulative during the period we've clearly seen it was how many units? 86. So make it simple. Therefore, to determine my cumulative at the end, I'll just be taking the 528 plus 86 units, which will give me a figure of how much? 614 units. I should be having 614 units. So that if I take the total time of producing the 614 units, my good students, if we take, and kindly mark this clearly, that X, we will be dealing with cumulatives. And that's why you're talking of cumulative production and cumulative production at start and at the end of the period. So we can agree that the difference between cumulative at start and at the end, I'll be having the 86 units. I'll be having the 86 units. I'll be having these 86 units. So it will be upon us to determine the total time of producing the 614 units and the total time of producing the 528 units. If we get this difference, that will give us the time that we took to produce 86 units. And once we have that, the time that we took to produce the 86 units, it will be very easy now for us to determine what? Our labor cost of producing 1 unit. So therefore, this is what we are going to do. Allow me to go to the other bit, believing that you've mastered that concept there. I'm switching the question on the other side. I'm switching this question on this other side. I'm switching the question on this other side. and you'll allow mwalimu to erase this area here. You'll allow mwalimu to erase this area here so that we determine that time, which you'll find it to be very, very easy. And the good thing with learning curve concept is that so long as you've mastered the key concepts, things will always be very easy. Like the video that we did earlier on, clearly introducing learning curve, demonstrating everything. If you have mastered that one, you'll find that learning curve concept will be very easy on our side. So therefore, at this point, we are talking of what? We want to determine the cumulative time, that is y, which is equal to ax, that is ax 1 plus b. 1 plus b. Right? So come to our question. I'm having the first x, I want to determine the cumulative time of producing our 614 units. 614 units. So how will you go about it? A, we've agreed A, we had seen our A to be 200 units, right? We had seen our A to be 200 units, which in this case, allow me just to kind of remove this question completely. So A, we are seeing A, we are having 200 units, which we had it here. B, in this case, I'm looking at cumulative production of 614 units, which we've looked at it here, 614 units. 1 plus our learning index, we had our learning index to be negative 0.152. That should give us our total number of hours required. I compare with the production of 528 units, where in this case you should be having A will not change. We multiply by 528, 1 plus, in this case, negative 0.152, which would give us our total time there. So that at this point you can agree that any time I am talking of this, we are talking of 614 minus 528, this should give us the 86 units that we are looking at. 86 units that we are looking at. So therefore, kindly having that case, I know it is easy now for us to work it out. So, can you give mwalimu the solution of that tafadhali? What will you be having? 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 So therefore, this is to say, the first case, I'm going to start with 1 plus minus 0.152. This should give me, I'm writing it somewhere, 0.848. I know the same case will apply with the other one. So I'm talking of 614 raised to power answer times 200. This should give me 46,000. I'm getting 46,280. 46,280. What about the other one? For 528, just take 528 raised to power 0.848, the one that we've determined here, times 200. This should give me 4721. 4721 hours. Remember, these are hours. So confidently, I can determine the total labor hours of producing the 86 units, which mwalimu will just take 46 to 80 minus 47 to 1. That should give me how many hours? 5,559 hours. 5,559 hours. These are the hours that we took to produce the 86 units. And once we have determined that, my good students, will find that things will be very easy on our side. Now, I'll have to determine our total labor cost. So how will you determine our total labor cost? To determine our total labor cost, this will be easy because I'm having the number of hours, total labor hours. I'm having 5,559. We multiply by the labor cost per hour. You're given how much? 10 shillings, if you can recall, right? So by 10, that should give us 55,590. 55,590. 55,590. 55,590. One will ask mwalimu, where are you getting that 10? This is the 10 that you're given. Look at this case. Go to note number 2, where we're told that standard labor cost, you're given 10 shillings per hour. That is where we've gotten that 10 shillings per hour. So therefore, having that case, I can now determine my total labor cost per unit, labor cost per unit, labor cost per unit. That is labor cost per unit. So labor cost per unit, therefore, labor cost per unit, we are going to take, of course, the 55,590. We are going to divide the number of units, which was 86 units. So that should give us, divide by aspect of 86 units to give us a figure of how much? 646. I'm getting 646. So confidently, I can come in our production cost per unit. And what we had marked as we don't know, which was this one, I'm going to have 646. I'm going to have here 646. 646. So that as at the end of the day, I can now determine my production cost per unit, which will be 250, my good students, plus 646 plus 1755 to give me a figure of 2651. And that is what the examiner wanted us to determine. So these are concepts of learning curve that if you master it from the word go, things will be very, very easy on our side, just the way you've seen how you handle it. So in our next class, my good students, we are going to do this another question for learning curve, which again will open our mind wide, which again, throw in a whole different concept. So to this point, guys, thank you so much, and let us meet in our next session. Thank you.